In the Ravensbrück concentration camp, over 50,000 women were murdered and twice as many were tortured. Some 3,500 female guards worked there for 6 horrific years until 1945. Shortly before the hood was placed over her head, the noose tightened and the hatch beneath her opened, Dorothea Binz, one of the most hated and disgusting female SS guards at the Ravensbrück concentration camp, uttered her last words. "I hope you don't think we were all evil people," she said as she removed her necklace and handed it to her executioner. It was a confusing statement, considering that to the tens of thousands whose lives she had turned to hell and for whose horrific deaths she was responsible, she was the epitome of evil. What kind of Nazi women were capable of committing such horrific atrocities against other women? What was wrong with them? The usual answer is that the female guards were passed off as half men. It was as if they were trying to be, like brutal SS officers. What they really lacked was femininity. Perhaps they lacked love or affection. Some of them had been abused as children. But they always looked great. Many were blonde and beautiful, and in their mouse-gray jackets, culotte skirts, caps, and leather boots had a special and unique look. Even the city girls envied them. But the elegant and naturally fair-haired Dorothea Binz, the beautiful bitch, as she was called, with her rounded cheeks and upturned nose, was cut from a different material. She was in charge of the bunker, the camp punishment cell, and liked to beat and torture prisoners by pouring ice water on them. They quickly learned to avoid her gaze. She was especially cruel to Red Army prisoners, Russian pigs, as she called them. Her eyes shone when she beat people. Once, in the freezing cold, she drove the captive Russians outside and forced them to undress. After that, she ordered buckets of water to be filled and poured over the prisoners right out in the open. The poor people froze, crawling and suffering on the icy ground. Several people died there. 10 more later died of pneumonia. 3 more people lost fingers and toes, as they received very severe frostbite. One of the first prisoners at Ravensbrück was Doris Mace, a German doctor who first saw Binz when one female prisoner tried to commit suicide by jumping on the electric fence. Dorothea Binz stopped her. She dragged the skeleton-like woman away and beat her on her bare thighs with a cane. Such cruelty in such a young and beautiful man made a lasting impression on me. Doris Mace told me afterward. The daughter of a forester, Dorothea Binz was born March 16, 1920, Templin, Brandenburg, Weimar Republic. She grew up in the forests around Fürstenberg, attended village schools and churches, played on forest trails, chased wild pigs, swam in lakes in summer, and skated in winter. Such was her childhood. Remarkably, working at the camp was her first job. She was also young enough not to have had much experience of life before Hitler's rule. She accepted his doctrines as gospel. At 10, she and her friends joined the League of German Girls, the women's wing of the Hitler Youth. At school, she followed the Nazi curriculum, which taught children to despise Jews and insult society's outcasts. As a teenager, she contracted tuberculosis, spent months in a clinic, and missed school. Branded as a carrier of tuberculosis and deprived of many jobs because of the danger of infection, she worked as a cook after high school. When a chance presented itself at age 19 to become a guard at a new concentration camp opening nearby, she jumped at it. Later, while climbing the ranks, she laughingly recounted how her father had told her not to take the job, but the opportunity to live away from home, in comfortable conditions, with good pay, and in fancy uniforms was too good for her. Dorothea's special amusement was hunting for women with curly hair. At roll call, she would walk slowly along the rows of prisoners, examining their heads, and if she found a curly lock of hair peeking out from under a hat, she would knock the woman down. On one occasion, it turned out to be a Jewish woman. She forced this prisoner to shave her head, and then flaunted it in front of the other women with a placard around her neck. I broke the rules and curled my hair. The camp had its own barber shop, where the wardens were pampered by inmate barbers. The hair that was cut from the women's hair was later used to make wigs. Dorothea had many such wigs and collected them. One springtime, during the roll call, she beat a Jewish woman to death because she was menstruating and was bleeding all over her legs. When Dorothea saw this, she became furious and started beating the poor woman, shouting at her, "What a disgusting bitch you are! Aren't you ashamed?" It was a terrible sight. Dorothea also sometimes helped the camp doctor Herta Oberhuser when she gave lethal injections to prisoners. One day she had the urge to kill one teenager just for wetting the bed. Herta told Dorothea to bring the boy to a barracks converted into a laboratory, where experiments were conducted on the prisoners. Since children were not much use in the camp, they were easily disposed of. Dorothea brought the boy and stayed to see what would happen to him. Dr. Herta gave the boy candy and then gave him an injection. The poor child squirmed in pain for an hour, drooling out of his mouth, urinating under himself and convulsing until he died. All these observations were recorded by doctors. Dorothea later told one of the guards that she felt like a god watching that boy die. She was in an emotional ecstasy, seeing how easy it was to take the life of a child that someone had raised for years. Dorothea was no stranger to stealing large quantities of powdered milk, semolina, and other cereals from Red Cross parcels and keeping them for herself while children in the camp starved to death. This is what all the guards did. The food reached the children very sparingly. Often she would hug and coo over babies born in the camp. She would ask the mother to give her a baby and hold it in her hands, smiling sweetly. On leaving, she said she would bring something tasty for the mother, but of course she did not keep her promise and took all the food for herself. She, like most of the staff, felt justified in the cruelty she displayed. She unconditionally accepted the Ravensbrück philosophy that prisoners were a burden on the fatherland. Dorothea's justification for beating prisoners was that they were poorly disciplined. As for the whip she had, she justified its use by saying that I couldn't hit them with my hand because they were always infested with lice, so she said. Even after the camp was released, during the trial in which she was accused, the evidence of this sweet girl's atrocities was so horrific that one of the prosecuting attorneys felt physically ill when he first read the evidence. Nevertheless, when Binz and the other guards from the Ravensbrück waddled to the bench to stand trial, observers were struck by their mediocrity. They did not look worried or remorseful. They smiled as if nothing had happened. Dorothea even petitioned for clemency, which was rejected. On May 2, 1947, Dorothea Binz was hanged in Hameln prison along with E. Marshall, H. Bissell, and the other warders of the Ravensbrück camp.